Hello there. Do you see me? I'm the family picture, the one standing on the table. Not too fancy, but I've been here for years, watching. Watching everything. Every meal, every laugh, every moment. But lately, things have changed. Something feels different. A shadow lingers in this room. A heaviness in the air. And I can't quite shake the feeling that something is about to go terribly wrong. You can stay with me, right? I'm not comfortable being alone right now. The table I sit on is old, with years of stains and scratches. I remember the times when it was full of warmth. Laughter would echo through this kitchen. Her laughter. At first glance, the picture framed inside of me looks perfect. Smiles, the warmth of togetherness. But if you look closer, you'll notice the cracks that aren't so easily seen. Carly the teenager sitting in the middle. She's holding a golden retriever puppy in her arms, the small dog nestled comfortably, almost asleep. Carly is smiling, but it's a careful smile, not entirely relaxed. Her eyes seem distant, as though her thoughts are drifting elsewhere. And on the left is her mother Ashley. She sits with a big smile, trying to project warmth and positivity. Her hand resting gently on Carly's arm, as if to say, everything's going to be okay. But if you look into Ashley's eyes, there's something deeper. Some worry that lingers, a quiet burden she's carrying, even as she tries to stay positive for Carly's sake. She's doing everything she can to hold things together, but the effort is visible. On the right is Heath, her stepfather. He's smiling too, looking relaxed and at ease. But there's a hint of distance in his expression, a shadow lingering between his presence and the family. This isn't just a snapshot of a happy family. It's a reflection of something deeper, something more complicated. Because every family has its secrets hidden beneath the surface. There was a time when another photograph sat inside me. A different snapshot of this family's past. It was years ago, when Carly was just a baby, still innocent to the world around her. The picture was taken when she was only a few months old, small and fragile in her father's arms. Her biological father Kevin sits on the couch, holding her tightly, as if keeping her close could somehow protect her from what was coming. He's smiling, but if you look carefully, you'll notice something unusual about that smile. It's not just the joy of a new parent. It carries a weight. The strain behind his smile hinted at something lurking. Trouble that had already started to brew. It's the kind of smile that holds too much inside. As if he's trying to be present in the moment, but failing to let go of the burdens weighing him down. Addiction, financial troubles, or maybe it was the pressure of being a father. Whatever it wasn't obvious to anyone outside of this picture. To the casual eye, it was just a snapshot of a new family. But behind that smile, the cracks were already starting to form. Beside him on the couch sits Ashley, Carly's mother. She too is smiling, and at first glance, her expression seems bright, loving even. But like her husband, her smile tells a more complex story. There's a softness to her, the way she holds herself, but also a touch of something darker. A quiet worry just beneath the surface. Perhaps it's something only mothers can sense. An instinct, a feeling that things aren't quite as perfect as they seem. She looks at the camera, trying to present a face of hope and strength. But if you linger on her eyes, you'll see it. A flicker of anxiety. She's holding on to this moment, hoping it will last. But somewhere deep down, she already knows the truth. It's as if she's bracing herself for the unraveling that's about to come, trying to convince herself it's still far off in the future. Carly's biological father loved his family, but life had a way of testing him. Addiction crept into his life like a slow-moving shadow, at first just a whisper, then a force too powerful to escape. It began with small things. Days when he seemed a little more distant. Moments when his smile faded faster than it should. He tried to keep it all hidden. From Ashley and from Carly. But the truth always has a way of surfacing. Slowly but surely, his presence in their lives started to fade. The visits grew less frequent. The phone calls less reliable. Ashley, determined and loving, tried to shield Carly from the unraveling of their family. She took on both roles, mother and father, balancing work, home, and the emotional toll of raising a daughter alone. Carly was still too young to understand why her father wasn't around, why their life didn't look like other families. But children are more perceptive than we often realize. And even at that young age, Carly must have felt the absence. She must have wondered why her father wasn't there for bedtime, or why his smile wasn't in the same room as hers. I've watched Ashley. I've witnessed her quiet strength. And I've also observed the times when it wasn't so clear that she was going to make it through. It wasn't just the fight to make a life for herself after he left. No. There was the constant, painful tug-of-war over Carly, the fierce battle for custody that stretched across years, worn down by time and the exhaustion of trying to prove herself. I remember the days when the weight of it all seemed too heavy for Ashley to bear. The nights when she stayed up late, pacing, hands shaking, her face pale under the harsh light of the kitchen. But those weren't just ordinary nights. They were filled with phone calls, lawyers, and endless conversations that never seemed to go anywhere. I could see it in her eyes. She wanted Carly. She wanted her daughter to have a stable life. Every time Ashley wiped her tears away, trying to pretend they weren't there, I could hear her saying, "I'm strong. I'll make this work. I have to." But there were moments, silent moments when she'd stand still, staring at me, her fingers gently brushing the frame of the photograph, as if searching for some memory, some lost sense of certainty. Carly, so young and torn between two worlds, she didn't understand the weight of it, of the endless courtrooms, the back and forth battles over who would raise her, who would love her best. The guilt that Ashley carried was sometimes unbearable. Then her boyfriend Heath came into their lives, a stable presence. He was patient, understanding, but I could see Ashley's unease. It wasn't just about him, it was about Carly. Would she accept him? Would she ever feel the same way about him as she did about her real father? I can see the way Heath looks at Carly, like he wants to be the father figure she never had. But the distance is there. Carly's eyes are full of rebellion, and she shuts herself away in her room more than I ever remember before. He tries to talk to her, to bridge the gap, but there's always something unspoken, something heavier than just a stepfather trying to bond. She doesn't let him in. She doesn't let anyone in. Mother Ashley, though, she's different with him. I've noticed it in the way she holds herself when he's around. When he's there, the house feels warmer, more settled, as if she can finally take a deep breath without wondering if it's all going to fall apart. He makes her smile, genuinely, in a way I haven't seen in years. And yet, sometimes, when he's not around, I still catch her staring at me, her fingers tracing the edge of my photograph, as if she's looking for something in the past that she feels slipping away. Heath is trying to smooth over the cracks, trying to create a family when none exists, but he's fighting an uphill battle. The scars Carly carries are deeper than anyone knows, and even though she tries to push them down, they show in her every action. I see her retreat, locked away in her thoughts, her mind still dwelling on the father who vanished. I hear Heath trying to soothe Ashley sometimes. "Give her time," he says to Ashley one night. "She'll come around. It just takes time." Ashley nods, but there's a sadness in her eyes. A sadness I know all too well. She's been waiting for this moment for so long, waiting for things to be right, for things to feel whole again. But every time Carly retreats further, it's as though the gap between them grows wider, and no one knows how to close it. When Carly was little, Ashley would call her my genius and show off her perfect grades and shining achievements. But that wasn't the whole story. There was something Carly didn't say, something she kept buried beneath the facade of perfection. She was sharp, yes, but also restless, always pulling at the seams of the life her mother had created for her. I saw it all, the way Carly had fascination with knives, how she was punished for taking a Swiss knife to school. It landed her in a program for troubled teens. How could a girl so brilliant, so full of promise, be labeled that way? When Carly came back to school after those 6 months, she was different. Stronger, more guarded. Her mother, Ashley, taught geometry at Carly's school. There was no escape from her mum, not even in the classroom. Carly hacked into the teachers' computers, stole the answers, gave them away to classmates who were too lazy or too scared to do their own work. Everyone knew, everyone benefited, until it all came crashing down. I watched as Ashley took away Carly's phone privileges, locked her out of social media. She monitored everything. Carly could not reach her father, Kevin. Ashley made sure of that. She checked Carly's phone all the time, making sure there were no messages and no calls. It was a constant cycle of restriction and rebellion. Carly was suffocating under the weight of her mother's controlling parenting. She started vaping, cutting herself, sinking deeper into that dark, lonely place. I saw the scars. I watched the silent screams in Carly's eyes. But there was nothing I could do. Mother Ashley, in her panic, sent Carly to therapy, and I watched from the corner as Carly swallowed pills one after another. Antipsychotics. She changed again. But not for the better. It was as if her mind had become a cold, distant place. A fog took over. 5 days before it happened, Carly switched to Lexapro. And I noticed something was wrong. As the days go by, the tension rises. There's no anger, no loud shouting, but a heavy quiet fills the room when Heath and Carly are both present. I feel it. The tension is subtle, but it's there. And I wonder if I could speak, what I would say. Would I tell them that they can't keep pretending everything's fine? Or would I just stay silent? Letting time pass, watching, waiting for a resolution that may never come. March 19th, 2024. It was a typical afternoon when Carly and Ashley came home. I remember Ashley being unusually quiet, but Carly, as always, was full of restless energy. She went to walk the dogs as she always did. Her mother Ashley, though, had plans of her own. She heard someone mentioning that Carly had been vaping. Ashley was alarmed by this and decided to check her daughter's room. She found the vapes, the ones she had hidden away. She couldn't let Carly get away with it. Not again. She picked up the vapes and sat on Carly's bed. Her face a mask of disbelief and fear. I heard the sound of Carly returning home with the dogs, their paws tapping on the floor as she pushed open the door. She stepped inside, her gaze scanning the room, only to find that her mother wasn't in the living room anymore. The space felt different, quieter, as if something had shifted. But Carly didn't yet know what. She walked to her bedroom to find her mother, Ashley, sitting with a look of disbelief. In her hand were Carly's vapes, the ones she'd tried so hard to hide. Her mother's eyes were locked on the vapes, the evidence of her daughter's secret in plain sight. It wasn't just the vape, it was the betrayal, the feeling that her daughter had been keeping things from her. Carly felt a wave of dread wash over her, her mother's gaze shifting to her with a mix of hurt and anger. Ashley didn't say anything, but the silence was louder than words. Carly's heart pounded in her chest, every inch of her body on high alert. And then Carly turned away. She didn't speak. She didn't even look back. She moved with a quiet urgency that made my frame ache, as if everything around her had gone still, except for her. Carly's footsteps echoed down the hall, but I could only imagine where she was going, what she was thinking. It wasn't long before I heard the faint sound of drawers opening, the rustling of objects being disturbed, and then the unmistakable click of metal. Carly walked back to her bedroom, where her mother still was, her hand shaking slightly as she held the gun. Ashley must have sensed something was off, even if she couldn't put it into words. The atmosphere had shifted, thick, with an unspoken tension, a feeling she couldn't shake, though she might have tried to ignore it. But by the time she had time to react, Carly was already standing there, her hand trembling, but steady. The first shot rang out. So sharp, so jarring, I could feel it in the pit of my frame. I could hear Ashley scream in sheer terror. But Carly didn't hesitate. The second shot followed almost immediately. The crack echoing in the house. I could feel the weight of it, the cruelty, the betrayal. It was over in an instant. The silence that followed was unbearable. The dogs, caught in the unsettling stillness of the house, their ears perked, eyes wide with confusion and fear. It wasn't just the noise. It was the sudden break in the rhythm of their world, the abrupt disruption of a pattern they could never fully understand. They walked back and forth in the hallway, pacing nervously, their paws clicking against the floor in a restless rhythm. I watched Carly walking back into the living room, grabbing her mother's phone. There was no hesitation, no sign of confusion in her eyes, only a calculating focus that sent waves of unease through the house. It was like watching someone who already checked out from reality, no longer burdened by the weight of the moment, but instead consumed by an urgent need to control it. I couldn't help but wonder, what was she thinking? Her fingers moved across the screen with an unsettling calm, and then I saw it. The message sent to Heath. "Are you almost home, honey?" Heath's response came through soon after. "No, I'll be here for a little bit." What was she trying to do? The question lingered in the air. Was it a cry for help? A deliberate attempt to make everything seem normal, as though the past few minutes had never happened? Or was it something far more disturbing? A desperate attempt to cover her tracks, to make it seem as though everything was just fine? I couldn't know for sure. But what I did know was that the family I had once known, with all its smiles and warmth, was now twisted into something unrecognizable. The dogs seemed to be in a state of confusion, just like the rest of us, unsure of what had happened, of what was still coming. They sniffed the air, their ears perked. But there was no comfort to be found in the room. No relief. No reassurance that everything would be okay. It was as though they, too, were trying to make sense of what Carly had just done, and the strange, unsettling atmosphere that now hung over the house. Carly started to sing, almost absent-mindedly, as though everything happening around her was becoming another detached reality. It was the kind of tune that might have been comforting in any other context, but now in the house, the dogs pacing and the tension palpable in every corner, it felt like a foreign soundtrack to a tragedy unraveling. Carly now reached for her own phone, typing a message to her friends. "I am freaking out. There's an emergency at my house. Something really bad happened." Then Carly called one friend and asked her if she could come over. The dogs were still agitated, their paws scratching against the hardwood, their nervous energy vibrating through the space. They didn't understand, but they knew something was wrong. They padded restlessly from room to room, drawn to the hallway where the deed had been done. Their loyalty to Carly and her mother making it harder for them to process the tension, the sudden shift. But Carly, calm in the face of it all, wasn't thinking about the dogs. She wasn't even thinking about the life she had just ended. No, her mind was elsewhere. She waited. It wasn't long before the doorbell rang. Carly's friend, dropped off by her father, had arrived. But there was no one coming to save Carly. Not now, not when things had already spiraled too far. Carly met her friend with a quiet calm, as if nothing had happened. She led her inside. "Have you ever seen a dead body before?" She didn't wait for an answer. Instead, Carly led the friend to her mother's body. The shocking sight of Ashley must have been overwhelming. Carly said, "There are 5 bullets in this gun. I used 3 on my mother. The other 2 are for my stepdad Heath when he gets home." The words, spoken so bluntly, so chillingly, a promise that everything was still spiraling toward an even darker end. Carly didn't seem rattled by the gruesome spectacle. She didn't seem afraid. Instead, she simply asked her friend to wait outside in the garden for her stepfather to arrive. And like that, her friend, already uneasy, complied, perhaps hoping to understand, or perhaps fearing that the unthinkable had already occurred. And then, the wait began. I could feel the weight of each passing second as Carly stood in the heart of her own chaos. Her body poised in a strange, calm stillness. It was as though the world around her was suspended, caught between the weight of the decision she had just made and the horror of knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. Her movements, controlled and deliberate, were in sharp contrast to the wreckage she had set into motion. And then, just as the air seemed to thicken with tension, a vibration pierced the stillness. It was a message from Heath. "I'm almost home." The words hung in the air, so ordinary in their familiarity, but now they felt like a ticking time bomb, contemplating the next chapter of her twisted plan. Her heart must have raced, knowing that the man who would come through that door was her next target. The sound of tires on gravel grew louder, slicing through the tense silence of the house. A car was approaching. My focus sharpened as I heard the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on the porch, each step heavier than the last, each one carrying with it the weight of what was to come. Carly stood frozen, her body tight with anticipation. She was perfectly still, the gun aimed directly at the door, her fingers trembling ever so slightly as she held it, her breath shallow. The air between us felt thick, charged, as if even the walls could sense the storm building. I heard the keys and then the door opened. Heath, stepping in after a long day, perhaps expecting nothing more than the usual routine, walked into the threshold of the house. And then it happened. Her hand steady as she pulled the trigger. The sound sliced through the house, echoing off the walls. Heath screamed, clutching his shoulder where the bullet had grazed him. I could almost feel the shock ripple through him, confusion and pain mixing in his voice while screaming. The air vibrated with the sound of her response. Frantic, raw, desperate. A scream escaped her, something beyond human comprehension. A sound that felt like a primal howl from deep within. It wasn't just a scream of anger. No, this was something more. A scream that carried the weight of all the darkness she had kept inside. A darkness she hadn't yet fully understood herself. Heath, bleeding, his shoulder on fire with the pain of the wound, fought back. He wasn't just trying to stop her. He was trying to stop the impossible. This demon that had once been his stepdaughter now turned into something unrecognizable. I could hear the struggle, the violent thrashing. The noise was deafening. The crash of furniture, the shouts. Carly's face twisted in fear, rage, and something darker. And then came the second shot. Another deafening boom, followed by a violent struggle, a fight neither of them seemed prepared for. Carly, for a split second, seemed to lose herself completely. Her expression not one of confusion or fear, but one of pure, unrestrained madness. She had stopped being a daughter and in that moment had become something far worse. She let go of the gun. She threw it aside as if it were nothing more than a piece of trash. She didn't hesitate. She ran. I could feel her footsteps pounding on the floor, the urgency in each step. She burst through the door and into the backyard. The dogs, still on edge, scattered as she passed, unable to understand what was happening. The house was still trembling from the shock of the shots fired. "Run!" she yelled to her friend. I watched as Carly and her friend jumped over the garden fence, their movements frantic, desperate. They didn't look back. They ran. Her friend ran towards her own house. But Carly, she didn't stop. She didn't look back. Her legs carried her farther and farther away until she became a shadow in the distance. Heath, disoriented, trying to make sense of what had just happened, stumbled forward, clutching his shoulder, blood trickling from the wound. His mind must have been racing. Why had Carly done this? Did she think he was the intruder? Was this all just a horrific mistake? In the silence of the house, after the chaos of the struggle had faded, Heath did what he could. He called the police, his voice shaky as he explained the situation. He told them he had been shot by Carly. But what happened next was even worse than anything he could have imagined. Heath, unsure of what to do, began his own search, hoping there wasn't an intruder somewhere in the house. Maybe Carly had mistaken him for someone else. Maybe this was all just a horrible misunderstanding. He moved cautiously through the house, the tension still clinging to him like a second skin. The house felt off, like something was hiding behind every corner, in every room. When he reached Carly's bedroom, a sense of dread washed over him. There, lying on the floor, was his wife. Her face was covered with a towel, her lifeless body still and cold. She had been shot 3 times. The blood, dark and staining, was the only clue to the horror that had unfolded while he was out of the house. The realization hit him like a freight train. Carly had killed her mother. All that remained was confusion, pain, and the dreadful, crushing weight of the truth. His family had shattered, and there was no going back. And I, the pictured frame, could do nothing but watch it all unfold, each moment more twisted than the last. The family I had once known was gone, and in its place was a haunting silence, filled only by the distant echo of a lost innocence. I could hear the police before I saw them, the sirens wailing in the distance, growing louder, creeping ever closer. The kind of sound that cut straight into the heart, pulling everything into a frantic focus. The sound of the police cars barreling down the road felt like it echoed through every corner of the house. The dogs had gone silent, all the nervous energy gone, replaced with the heavy sense of anticipation that filled every inch of the air. Their paws scraped against the floor as they hovered by the door, waiting, confused, as if they knew something was about to happen but couldn't understand exactly what. I could hear the rapid pace of boots on the porch, voices shouting outside. The officers were coming for answers, coming to uncover the truth. I could almost feel the chill of their entry as they came through the door. Their presence in stark contrast to the stillness that had gripped the home moments before. As the police came into the house, they see Heath, disoriented, barely holding himself together. His eyes darted between the officers, his face pale, strained, and dripping with sweat as the weight of what had happened crushed down on him. "Where is she?" one of the officers asked. "She's dead in Carly's bedroom," his voice cracking under the pressure. The officers wasted no time. They moved quickly, guns drawn, the sounds of their movements, and then just as the air seemed to thicken with tension, they found her lifeless body still and cold. I heard officers talking. Carly was found. The police had been on her trail almost immediately. She had run, yes, but they had tracked her down, her hands raised in surrender. She was disheveled, her face pale, eyes hollow. And when the officers asked her what had happened, her answer was chilling. "I hear voices," she said. "I hear voices in my head. I wanted to hurt myself." The cameras, those ever-watchful eyes in the garage and living room, had caught every detail, every movement. The police were gathering evidence, piecing together the story from the security footage and taking Carly into custody. I had witnessed it all, the chaos, the suddenness of it all. The family I had known was no more. The life that had filled this frame was shattered. The answers remained scattered, like pieces of a puzzle. And I, this frame, was left to hold what was once whole. After the chaos, everything in the house changed. The dogs, always a comforting presence, were taken away by Heath, their familiar footsteps fading from the halls. The house felt even more empty, more haunted by the echoes of what had happened. The investigation had begun immediately. The house became a crime scene. Police officers, detectives, and forensic teams moving through the rooms I had once quietly observed. Their footsteps were deliberate, heavy, with the weight of their task. The air was thick with tension, questions, and the slow, careful work of trying to understand what had unfolded here. I sat there on the table, nestled among the other remnants of the life that filled this house. As investigators combed through the rooms, marking off areas with tape and examining every inch for evidence, I could see the tension in their movements, the gravity in their eyes as they went about their work. Occasionally, someone would glance at me, the photograph of the family before it all went wrong, and their expressions would shift, a flicker of sorrow or disbelief crossing their faces. A young woman with gloved hands, she stared at me. She didn't say anything, but I could feel her empathy. It was as if she could sense the weight of the history trapped in the image. The moments that had passed between these three people, now frozen forever in a frame. Her colleague murmured something about how hard these cases were, especially when children were involved. And the young woman nodded, blinking quickly as she carefully moved on. Then everybody left. The once bustling rooms, filled with the comings and goings of family life, were now eerily still. The light through the windows moved across the floor with the passing of days. It felt like the house was holding its breath, waiting. The house sat in a heavy silence, a kind of void left in the wake of all the activity. The house was a crime scene now that had been picked apart and catalogued, but it was still filled with the shadows of the past. No one came for a long time. The house stood still, collecting dust, the silence growing deeper with each passing day. And then one morning the movers arrived. They moved quickly, packing away the remnants of a family's life, boxing up everything that could be salvaged. I sat on the table, my frame undisturbed. They spoke about the trial. Their voices, though hushed, carried the news I had been waiting to hear. She got life without parole. The other person gave a small nod and added. They discussed her state of mind, but it didn't make a difference. Her actions were too severe to overlook. As they worked, I watched them pack Ashley's belongings, box by box. When they reached the table where I sat, they paused. One of them picked me up carefully and stared at the family picture within my frame. His face softened, and he let out a long sigh. I bet they were happy once, he muttered to his partner, placing me gently into a box lined with paper, as if the fragile memory I held needed extra care. And just like that, I too was wrapped up, covered in protective layers, and placed inside a box like all the other remnants of this shattered home. My story would now belong to whoever decided to open that box again. And as the house emptied, as the last of the movers left, I could feel the weight of what had happened settle in. The house was no longer a home. The lives that once filled it were gone, scattered to different places. And I, the frame that had seen it all, was tucked away in darkness, a silent witness to the rise and fall of a family. Now just another object in storage.